The fluorescent lights above the checkout line hummed faintly, and I was just paying for a cake when the cashier's hand gently caught my arm. His eyes, steady and serious, made me pause. In a voice low enough for only me to hear, he whispered, "Mom, they're spending your son's money." The words hit harder than the beep of the scanner. My grip on the bakery box tightened, and I felt the receipt tremble between my fingers. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This stranger had spoken my son's name as though he knew us, as though he understood something about our lives that I didn't. I walked out through the back entrance, the cool air rushing against my cheeks. My heart pounded so loudly I thought others might hear it. Instead of heading straight to the car, I slipped behind the dumpsters, hidden in the shadows. There, clutching the cake box, I realized this moment this whisper might change everything about my son's marriage. My name is Nora Beckett. I am 67 years old, and for most of my life I have lived by one rule: take care of family, no matter the cost. I grew up in Willow Springs, a modest town in the Midwest where neighbors still nod at each other on the street, and I raised my only son, Caleb, after my husband passed away far too soon. Money has never been easy. I count every bill twice before spending it, and I have always chosen to go without small comforts so Caleb could have a little more. If there was one bright spot through all the struggle, it was knowing my son grew up kind, hardworking, and generous. 3 years ago, Caleb married Maren Crane. I welcomed her with cautious optimism. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, even when she seemed distant, because I did not want to be the mother-in-law who stood in the way. But over time, I noticed things that did not add up, quiet details I brushed aside in the name of peace. Standing behind those dumpsters with my heart racing, I knew the stakes. If I was wrong, I risked breaking apart my son's marriage. If I was right, silence would cost him everything. Ed Nash, the cashier, looked older than his years, with lines that told stories of long days and harder nights. When my credit card declined, I already expected it. I rarely used it, knowing there was nothing in the account. I slid a few worn bills across the counter instead. That was the moment he studied me more closely, his expression shifting from routine politeness to quiet urgency. "You're Nora Beckett, right? Caleb's mother?" he asked. When I nodded, his voice dropped again. "I've seen the Cranes here more times than I can count. They spend hundreds on imported meats, fancy cheeses, bottles of champagne. Then I hear them brag your son helps out every month." His words sent a chill through me. Maren and her family had always told Caleb about rent crises, medical bills, and empty cupboards. Yet here was a stranger describing a life of abundance. "I don't mean to intrude," Ed added, "but my own mother went through something similar. No one told her until it was too late. I'd regret staying silent if I saw it happening again." With that, he finished bagging my cake and turned back to the next customer, leaving me stunned, clutching a truth I hadn't asked for but could no longer ignore. I stayed hidden in the alley, the bakery box balanced carefully on my lap, my breath fogging in the cool afternoon air. At first I wondered if I had overreacted. Maybe the cashier had mistaken someone else for Douglas Crane, Maren's father. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But then, through the glass doors of the grocery store, I saw him. Douglas emerged, walking with a steady stride, carrying 2 glossy black bags, stamped with the gold lettering of a gourmet market. They weren't the kind of bags you get from a discount chain. He approached a pale sub that gleamed in the sunlight, the kind of vehicle still new enough to smell of leather. I watched him pop the trunk, carefully place the bags inside, then linger a moment as if guarding something precious. When he pulled out his phone, his laughter carried across the lot, light and untroubled. This was not the body language of a man drowning in overdue bills, and when he casually tipped a man at the car wash with folded cash, my stomach sank. The stories I had heard for months about late rent, empty refrigerators, unpaid medicine suddenly seemed like shadows against this very bright, very undeniable reality. As I crouched there behind the dumpsters, memories pressed in on me like a tide. I thought of the phone calls that always came at night, Maren's voice urgent yet sweet. "Caleb, the landlord is threatening eviction. Can you send something tonight?" Or the tearful message about Douglas's doctor's appointment insurance won't cover it. We don't know what to do. And when the lights supposedly almost got shut off, Caleb worked an extra Saturday shift to make sure they stayed on. Each time he assured me it was only temporary, that helping was the right thing to do. I even found myself pulling from my own small savings, $60 here, $150 there. I told myself I was protecting my son's marriage, supporting the family he had chosen. Now, watching Douglas load expensive groceries into a spotless SUV, the memories stung differently. These weren't isolated struggles. This was a pattern, carefully repeated, always with just enough desperation to make refusal impossible. For the first time, I wondered if every sacrifice had been nothing more than fuel for someone else's comfort. Later that same day, Caleb and I arrived at the Cranes' home for Sunday lunch. Marin greeted us at the door, radiant in a dress that fit like it had been tailored. Her hair shimmered with fresh highlights, her shoes gleamed, and a new handbag swung from her arm. Inside, the house felt transformed since my last visit. The worn sofa I remembered was gone, replaced with supple leather that smelled new. A glass coffee table sparkled under the light, and against the wall stood a flat-screen television larger than any I had ever owned. In the kitchen, the counters were covered with dishes in preparation. Thick steaks rested on cutting boards, exotic vegetables were chopped and waiting, and bottles of imported spices lined the backsplash. Douglas poured deep red wine into crystal glasses, grinning as he explained, "Got this from a friend at a discount." That phrase, "at a discount," had become their favorite shield. Everything new was always a gift, a special sale, or an unbelievable bargain. Caleb laughed easily with his wife, proud of her cooking and the meal before us. I forced a smile, but every detail pressed heavier on me. The abundance didn't look like a family fighting for rent. It looked like people living well and telling stories to keep the money flowing. And as I sat down at their gleaming table, I wondered how much longer Caleb could go on without seeing the truth. When we left that afternoon, Caleb walked ahead to bring the car around. I lingered on the sidewalk, my thoughts churning. That was when I overheard two women chatting as they loaded groceries into their trunks. "Did you see Marin's dress at the mall yesterday?" one asked. "Had to be at least $200. I saw the same one in the boutique upstairs." The other nodded knowingly. "And she's always at that French beauty shop. My niece works there, says Marin is one of their best customers. You'd never think they were strapped for cash the way she spends." Their voices faded as they pushed their carts away, but each word settled deeper in me. Then my phone buzzed, a message from an unfamiliar number, Ed Nash. He had somehow found my contact and sent me a photo of a receipt dated just 2 days earlier. The total was more than $400, champagne, seafood, imported cheeses. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. That same week, Maureen had texted Caleb saying they had no money for groceries. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. For the first time, I felt the ground beneath their stories start to crumble. That night, back in my small apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with the receipt glowing on my phone screen. I thought about the cake I had bought with crumpled bills, about my son's long hours at work, about the countless times I had chosen silence over confrontation. I knew then that silence was no longer an option, but I also knew Caleb's heart. If I stormed in with accusations, he would defend his wife and her family. Love can blind even the wisest person. So I made a promise to myself. I would not speak until I had evidence so clear, so undeniable, that no one could twist it into a misunderstanding. I would gather every receipt, every detail, every inconsistency. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. My son deserved truth more than I feared conflict, and from that night forward I would quietly but firmly start collecting it. The next week tested every ounce of my patience. I smiled when Caleb called, I nodded through Sunday service, but inside I carried a mission no one else knew. Ed Nash became my quiet ally. 3 times he sent photos of receipts, each one worse than the last. One showed more than $600 spent in a single trip, 2 bottles of French champagne, imported seafood, and wheels of gourmet cheese. The timestamp? The very day Marin had texted Caleb saying their rent check had bounced. Then Francine, a neighbor, slipped me more details. She said delivery trucks pulled up almost weekly at the Cranes' house, groceries, furniture, even catering trays. Another neighbor, Joy, mentioned fresh permits for renovations, new paint and landscaping. Meanwhile, I scrolled through Marin's social media. There were glimpses of balloons, flower arrangements, and dishes too elaborate for a family barely scraping by. I kept a notebook where I drew a simple chart. On one side, every plea for help Marin had sent. On the other, the receipts and sightings Ed and the neighbors provided. The lines crossed again and again, forming a pattern impossible to ignore. What looked like emergencies in Caleb's messages were nothing more than performances to fund luxury, and soon I would have to show him. I waited until a quiet Wednesday evening when Caleb stopped by after work. He looked worn down, his tie loosened, his shoulders slumped. Over dinner, I asked him gently about his long hours. He brushed it off, saying Marin's family just needed a little extra help. That was when I took a deep breath and slid my notebook across the table. Inside were the receipts Ed had sent me, the dates highlighted, the totals circled. Next to each I had written the exact day Marin had texted asking for help. Caleb frowned, scanning the pages. "Mom, there's got to be an explanation. Dad Crane's been picking up shifts. Marin finds bargains." I nodded, letting him speak. Then I asked the one question I had prepared for. "Son, have you ever seen the receipts for those bargains? Or the proof of those extra shifts?" His eyes faltered. Silence hung between us. "I'm not accusing," I said softly. "I'm showing you what I've seen. You deserve the truth, Caleb, even if it's hard." The crack in his certainty was small, but it was there. I could see the first seed of doubt taking root, and I knew it was only the beginning. It was past midnight when my phone rang. Caleb's voice came through, ragged and low. "Mom," I looked through her things. He told me he had gone home, unable to sleep after our talk. While Marin showered, he opened the closet. Behind stacks of sweaters were shopping bags from boutiques. Some with tags still attached hundreds of dollars in clothes and accessories he had never seen her wear. But the worst discovery was in her purse, a small spiral notebook tucked beside her wallet, filled with neat handwriting. Inside, Maureen had listed every emergency she had ever told him: rent shortfalls, medicine for her father, utility shutoffs. Next to each she had written the exact amount she asked for and whether Caleb had given it. Further down the pages were notes about future plans. Dental surgery for Mom, $1,800. If questioned, guilt him, say family loyalty. I sat frozen, listening. It wasn't desperation. It was strategy mapped out like a business plan. "Mom," Caleb whispered, his voice breaking. "She's been keeping track of how to use me. Every lie, every dollar, all written down." The next evening Caleb confronted Marin. He told me later how it unfolded, his voice still heavy with disbelief. At first Marin laughed. "You're overreacting. Those bags are gifts, that notebook is just for household expenses." But when Caleb pressed, showing her the receipts and holding the spiral book in his hands, her tone snapped from denial to fury. "You had no right to dig through my things. This is your mother's fault. She's always hated me, always trying to poison you against us." Caleb didn't back down. He called Douglas on speakerphone, demanding answers. For a moment, Douglas tried the old lines: cut hours at work, unexpected bills. But when Caleb told him he already knew the truth, there was a long silence. Finally, Douglas sighed. "It's not personal, son. We knew you had a steady job. Families help each other. That's all." Marin's face twisted. Instead of denying it, she turned on her father. "Why would you admit that? You've ruined everything." She wasn't upset about the lies, she was furious the plan had been exposed. In that instant, Caleb told her their marriage was over. No more money, no more excuses, no more lies. When he called me afterward, his words were heavy but steady. "Mom, I finally see it. They never wanted me as family. They only wanted me as income." The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and painful clarity. Caleb filed for divorce, and his attorney began untangling the finances. What they uncovered left us both shaken. Over the course of 2 years, Marin had funneled more than $15,000 into a secret account. Every emergency had become part of that hidden stash. Credit card statements showed luxury purchases, travel-sized cosmetics from boutiques, even deposits marked simply as family fund. Caleb sat with me one night, his face pale. "That's half a down payment on a house, Mom. That's years of extra shifts, gone." The guilt weighed on him, but I reminded him gently, generosity isn't weakness. It becomes dangerous only when it's exploited. Therapy helped him process what had happened. Slowly, he built new habits. He asked for receipts when lending money, waited a few days before agreeing to help, and checked stories against facts. It wasn't cynicism, it was wisdom. Caleb was learning that boundaries protect kindness rather than erase it. I watched him grow steadier with each passing week. The shame in his voice began to fade, replaced by a cautious confidence. My son had been wounded, but he was healing, and this time he was determined not to be used again. 2 years passed, and the shadows of that painful chapter began to lift. Caleb moved into a small townhouse closer to his office, where sunlight spilled across the living room each morning. With time, he met Tessa Monroe, a colleague known for her steady laugh and clear honesty. From the start, she was different. At their first dinner with me, Tessa arrived with bags of fresh vegetables and insisted we cook together. Afterward, she rolled up her sleeves and washed the dishes, humming softly as the water ran. There were no grand stories, no excuses, just sincerity. When Caleb and Tessa married, the wedding was simple but filled with genuine warmth. A year later, they told me they were expecting their first child. One evening, as laughter from the kitchen reached me, I realized how much had changed. The house sounded lighter. The weight of manipulation had been replaced with trust, and the silence that once carried secrets now carried joy. Looking back, I see the lessons written as clearly as those receipts. If you ever face a situation like mine, remember this: start with what you can observe, not with accusations. Numbers, dates, and patterns speak louder than arguments. There were warning signs I had ignored. The constant emergencies that never had paperwork to back them up. The lifestyle that didn't match the stories of struggle. The anger that flared whenever questions were asked. And most of all, the way blame was always shifted onto someone else, usually me. For anyone listening, here are gentle guardrails I wish I had known sooner. Set a clear budget for what you can give, and never decide under pressure. Offer practical help instead of cash when possible. Pay a bill directly, buy the groceries yourself, and when requests grow bigger, bring in another set of eyes to help evaluate. True love and loyalty don't collapse under reasonable questions. They welcome honesty. If this story resonates with you, let it be a reminder: kindness is precious and boundaries protect it. Tap the like button if this gave you perspective, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and tell me in the comments, what boundary are you setting to keep your generosity safe this year?